Hi everyone, happy October. Welcome to Lake County Dark History. My name is Cheyenne Blue. I'm a real estate agent with Country Air Properties, and I love telling stories surrounding Lake County, the history, fun facts, things along that line. And I created this series as a special for October. Granted, things have been kind of crazy, so I haven't been able to be regular with the upload, so I do apologize for that, but I will do my best to make up for it. And I'm thinking about possibly making this a continual thing that I may do once a month, so let me know if you would like me to continue it. If you like videos like this, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. If you would like to check out more dark history on Lake County, then go over to my dark history playlist where I will put all my dark history videos into. My costume today is a 90s grunge girl. I have the makeup, the layers. I was going to try to find one of my 90s band shirts, but I couldn't find any because I thought that would be great to layer the flannel with. Today we are going to be talking about the Lake County Whitecap Murders. So, grab your favorite warm drink, some fuzzy pajamas, and snuggle up next to the fireplace or your heater, and let's get into the dark history of Lake County. It all started after the Civil War. There was a time of peace, but I mean, there's always a time of peace before tragedy, isn't there? There was a very bitter taste between the political parties. Groups of vigilantes rode by night to enforce their own ideas of right and wrong. And their ideas of right and wrong were basically, if you opposed anything that they believed, you were in the wrong. It could be anything from race, slavery, morality, even religion. There were quite a few groups with similar agendas, but the most ruthless of them all, the Whitecaps. The Whitecaps rode in disguise to commit the murders, probably guessing what those disguises are by the name. Very Ku Klux Klan-like for sure. They had these white masks that would cover their face, and they would wear sacks or coffee sacks that would hang down around their overalls with jagged holes cut out for the neck and for armholes. Kind of funny when you think about it. All I imagine really is people looking like scarecrows with white masks. These groups spread terror everywhere. They were all over the United States. Over the years, their power, the number of people that joined them, and their crimes increased and increased. In 1888, the San Francisco Chronicle reported, "The Whitecap investigation by the authorities has discovered a great pile of secret evidence against that organization. If there are indictments, only the state militia has power to enforce the court's decision and protect the litigants from the Whitecaps' enmity. The Whitecap members are certain to intimidate and drive away all persons that may wish to turn state's evidence." The following year, the Chronicle announced, "Their maltreatment of citizens is more infamous than ever. They have taken to tar and feathering women in order to purify the morals of the town." Kind of reminds me of the Salem witch trials, doesn't it? A lawyer named Middleton was seized on the porch of his home by 12 or 15 men with white masks. He was whipped until he passed out. In Toledo, Ohio, papers reported a band of men in whitecap attire forced entry into the home of a farmer named Hanst. They committed the shocking outrage of cutting off Hanst's right ear and part of his left ear. Again in Ohio, a newspaper declared a Catholic bishop in Dyersville, Iowa, was threatened with death if he dared to take part in the dedication of a new Catholic church. In Mason City, Ohio, a paper stated, "Prowling, cowardly ruffians visited a Mason City home. They dragged out both husband and wife and ordered them to leave and never return to this area." In 1890, a special bulletin in the Denver News read, "The Whitecap organization in New Mexico, who outrages were recently called to the attention of the Secretary of the Interior, has become so bold that the governor is compelled to proclaim they must disband. If they do not, he shall order out the United States troops. You know things have got to be getting bad at this point in order for them to do that. The government, they had enough. They were fed up with all the crimes, the threats, the ravages across the country that these people were causing. And they began a campaign to round up the group of maniacs. Now you're probably thinking, Cheyenne, these are all other areas. What does this have to do with Lake County? I'm getting to that. The event that we're going to be talking about today happened in Middletown in 1890. And it was called the Whitecap Murders, but strangely, this crime had nothing to do with the actual Whitecaps. These people were basically Whitecap wannabes. They wanted to be a part of the organization and were trying to make a name for themselves. And these murders were considered some of the most heinous in Lake County history. Granted, after doing Bloody Island, I don't think this one tops it, to be completely honest. It was October 10th, 1890 in the evening at the Campers Retreat. The Campers Retreat was just north of Two Mines, about a mile north of the Two Mines, and 3 miles from town. Its saloon, which occupied the main part of Campers Retreat, had a pretty intense reputation. It wasn't so much for campers as much as for the ruffians, the big drinkers, gamblers, aggressive drinkers, and it was known to have quite a bit of bar fights. Even though the place was known for the bar fights, it had its own place here in the town. And the bartender, Fred Bennett, was the one that kind of kept everybody in line. He was a really big guy, very big, strong guy. And he handled the problem customers with force, and he kept the rowdiness to a minimum. A lot of people in the town considered Fred Bennett to be a bruiser. His job as a bouncer definitely wasn't gentle in any way. During his time in Lake County, he actually became a very feared individual. He was known to knock out problem people with his fists, which actually included a few of the guys that came during that night. Of course, though, these disputes made Fred Bennett a very hated and dangerous man. This night, there were only 3 people in the saloon. Fred Bennett, the bartender, and the names vary for the couple. Most of the articles, they go by Reish, and J.W. Reish and Helen Reish. However, in others, they say that they're Thompson, so I'm not sure which name is actually accurate, but I'm just going to go with Reish today because that was the name that I saw most consistently throughout the articles. So J.W., Helen, and Fred, they were all playing cards together since there were no more customers for the night. It had grown dark, and they finished up their card game. It was around 9 o'clock at night. They were getting ready to leave, and Fred was getting ready to close up. Front door was closed. When all of a sudden, without a knock, warning, anything, the door swung open, and in entered 5 masked men with guns drawn. Outside, more masked men surrounded the building, making a raiding party of 11 guys. Some of them carried weapons. Mr. Reish, J.W., he thought that this was just some harmless prank at first, and he greeted them with a smile. He thought that he recognized one of the masked guys as a young miner known as Charles Evans, and I don't mean miner as in someone under 21, but miner as somebody that actually works in the mines. JW playfully reached out and slapped Evans' cheek. He was sure this had to be a prank. I mean, what would you think was going on, especially if you think that you know the person? He laughed, "You don't scare me." And to that, a gunshot whizzed right past his head, almost hitting him. He said he knew in that moment these people meant business. It wasn't a prank. Helen, angry at the rude intrusion, rushed at one of the men and tried to pull up his mask to see who it was that was doing this. At the same time, seeing her intent, her husband grabbed at her, moving to protect her, and one of the masked men reached her first. He pushed her to the floor, and at that same instant, gunfire everywhere. There were 8 to 10 shots, maybe more. He tried to pull Helen away from the man that was holding her down, and then that was when he saw she was wounded. She had been shot and her side was bleeding. JW always kept 2 pistols in his bedroom under his pillow, but he knew in this moment he would not be able to reach those. However, there was a Winchester .44 rifle that was behind the front door of the saloon, and the masked men, they were in his way. He pushed Helen's body under a little raised part of the bar and hoped to take her to the kitchen for safety while he went to the bedroom for his pistol. Helen, she was a fighter. Somehow, during all this, she ended up crawling herself across the floor and grabbed the Winchester from behind the door. She tried to throw the rifle to her husband, and one of the men saw what she had done and took the Winchester out of her hand, throwing the weapon out of reach. Making no further move, Mrs. Reach, she laid on the floor bleeding. Fred Bennett, the bartender, he disappeared into the bedroom, leaving JW alone to deal with the situation. JW stated that he figured the best thing to do was to get right in the middle of the men. That way, they could not shoot him without risking their own safety. Pretty smart, actually. He did this and then backed out of the room onto the porch. The last one in the room he threw out, and as he did, he heard more shots outside of the porch by the door. The shooters ran. They realized that this had all gotten out of hand. JW returned to his wife. He locked the front door, picked up his wife, and carried her to the bedroom. When he pushed at the bedroom door, at first, it refused to open. "Bennett!" he called, believing that he was behind the door. He was in the bedroom. And he opened the door. "Go for a doctor," he told him. He left immediately. When he knew that Bennett was gone, when Fred was gone, he locked the door again. One of his revolvers was not loaded, so he loaded it for protection. Then he heard someone coming up the front porch. He took the revolver in each hand and opened the door. "I'm ready for you now." They were gone. Whoever it was ran away. Must have been a very scary "I'm ready for you." I mean, he was understandably pretty upset. I mean, you shot his wife. What do you expect? In Middletown, 3 miles away, there was a political celebration going on. Just about everybody was there, including all the officers. They were having a great time. All of a sudden, Fred Bennett comes racing on a horse, saying, help me, there's been a shooting at Camper's Retreat. We've been raided by a party of masked men. Mrs. Reich has been shot. We need a doctor." Just within minutes, the doctor was summoned, and a large posse of townsmen, including the doctor, the constable, the sheriff, the district attorney, just about everybody and their mother, were at the ready, boarded a stagecoach, and galloped off to the scene of the crime. The raiders had not escaped completely. When the town men arrived, one of the Whitecaps, W.R. McGuire, lay dead on the porch. 2 more men, neighbors of Reich, had also arrived at the scene of the crime and were waiting for the posse. One of the men was John Habishaw. Habishaw and his wife, neighbors, lived a short distance from the Reiches. He told the sheriff what he found when he arrived. Habishaw stated that he heard 3 shots fire, and then not long after, Fred Bennett ended up coming over to his residence and telling him that he was looking for help for Mrs. Reich and that he was going to go to town to find so. But until then, if he could go over there and see if he could help in any way, which he did. When he got there, he found corpses lying on the ground. He pointed at one corpse and said, "We found this body here." His pistol was still in his hand. Mr. Reich was inside, and he opened the door and saw it was me. I asked him, "Who killed this man?" Reich was surprised to see the dead man. "I don't know who killed this man. None of the shots that killed him came from inside the tavern," he told me. The men in the posse stared at the bleeding corpse with interest. The dead man was dressed in what was meant as some sort of disguise, but he looked more like he was dressed for Halloween. His arms were covered in red sleeves, burlap sacks were sewn around his body and legs, and there was a white paper mask over his face. Later, as they searched the tavern grounds, they found more white masks, but these ones were made out of flour sacks, with the holes cut out for eyes. Near the barn, 60 feet from the tavern, they discovered a small tin lard bucket filled with tar and cat-o'-nine-tails whip laid next to the bucket. Habishaw continued his explanation. When he came inside the room, a chair was laying on its side, and a Winchester rifle was leaning on the chair. Remembering the sight, he added, "The stock was covered in blood." One of the men in the posse was a new resident to the town, and he was a physician, Dr. Roland Hartley. At the trial, Dr. Hartley testified, "The fatal shot to the dead man on the porch came from a gunshot wound in the heart. The shot had been fired from behind. I found a bullet which might have been a .44 laying loose in the dead man's clothing. Later, it was found that the dead man had been killed with a .22 caliber bullet. The .44 caliber casing that they found was actually a whistle that was used by one of the ringleaders to give the signal to the other raiders for them to charge the tavern room." Dr. Hartley testified the injury to McGuire was a large wound. The bullet entered the point below the left shoulder blade and directly into the heart. Despite the reams of testimony and evidence, the identity of the person that killed McGuire was never discovered. Hartley continued, "I found Mrs. Reich lying on the bed. Her clothes were open and there were 5 wounds in her side and above the right shoulder. Her general condition was severe. I believe she was about to die. I asked the district attorney, who was also in the room, if he wished Mrs. Reich to take an ante-mortem statement. He replied it was not worthwhile to bother her. She was dying." Mrs. Reich suffered 4 days before she died. There was great sympathy and concern over her murder, and according to the Calistogian, October 15th, 1890, her funeral was one of the largest ever seen in Middletown. People praised Mrs. Reich. She was brave to the last breath. Tearing the mask from one of the bandits gave a clue to the guilty parties and helped to identify them. At the trial, Dr. Hartley testified about the results of the autopsy on Helen Reich's body. There were 6 bullet wounds in all. The fatal wound was the bullet that penetrated her left lung, causing eventual suffocation. All bullets, .22 caliber pistol. So those days, she was basically suffocating to death because of the way that she was shot. Dr. Hartley added one important observation that caused some consideration in the courtroom. All of the bullets had ranged downward. His testimony implied that she was shot while laying on the floor. The Middletown's Independent headline and the text the next day reported, "A dastardly outrage. Lake County has a good reputation for law observance, its county jail being usually empty. There is no disgusting truth. The fair name of our county has been colored with odium by this terrible affair." Or was that with Bloody Island? Sheriff Moore held 10 suspects for the trial. 3 of the raiders, B.F. Staley, A.E. Richard, and J. Archer, were held for the murder without bail. The rest were not held, but directed to remain in the county. Who were these 10 men? They were not outlaws. They were ordinary citizens. The single thing they had in common was that they all worked for the mine. One man was part owner of the Bradford mine. Staley, one of those held for murder, had been an election officer at the Great Western Mine, one of the places selected for polling. The man chosen to prosecute the Whitecap Raiders was Andrew Roca. Roca, a passionate man for justice, was the same man that helped bring Buck English, the Lake County highwayman outlaw, to justice a few years earlier, which I'll tell you that guy's story as well one of these days. These were the names of the Whitecap Raiders as they were described by newspaperman Charles Michelson. Charles Osgood, a tall, pleasant-looking young fellow whose wife visited him constantly. C.E. Blackburn, short and heavily built, he was considered by some to be the smartest of the lot. He looked nervous and wore glasses. Henry Arcaro, an Italian who was small, dark, and slender, had a black mustache and eyes set close together. Robert Chadwick, a jolly Cornish miner with a frame that denoted strength and endurance. A.E. Bickard, the merriest man in the group, he had a fat, good-humored French face that was always wrinkled to laugh. Arcaro and Bickard were close friends while they were in jail. Bickard tried to improve Arcaro's English. Charles Evans, the youngest of the group, was a tall, fair-haired lad of 19. He was an ordinary, awkward, open-faced boy with just a touch of down in his upper lip. John Archer, he was a big, strong, fine-looking Scotsman, was less than 30 years old. Whenever he spoke, he always had a pleasant smile. Archer had a wife and 2 children waiting for him in Scotland. August Gus Lund was the most studious of the men. He was seldom without a book in his hand. Lund was a stout young Swede with blue eyes, blonde hair, and a mustache. Thomas Martin was a broad-shouldered man, and he had a fierce red mustache. B.F. Stanley, he looked sick, with a thin face and big mustache. He was without the broad shoulders of his many companions. So as you can see, it was definitely a range of different people from different backgrounds, and most of them seem to be pretty calm, ordinary people otherwise. You never know who people really are behind closed doors. The people spoke next. The preliminary hearing for the people of the state of California versus B.F. Stanley and all opened in Lakeport on February 2nd, 1891. The trials began 4 days later, February 6, 1891. In what is now the museum directly across from the present county building. 10 cases were to be tried, 1 for each of the 10 defendants. There were more than 36 witnesses. The judge proceeding was R.W. Crump, judge for the 7th District. It makes you think, when there's over 36 witnesses, why didn't anyone do anything to help? The officers serving for the people of California at the landmark trial were S.K. Walsh. District Attorney assisting Walsh was B.K. Crawford. Associate Attorney and Andrew Rocca, Clay Taylor, Liburn H. Boggs was the sheriff, and the clerk was W.L. Anderson. Bail was set. The bail amount for Thomas Martin and Robert Chadwick was set at $4,000 each. Doesn't seem like much in today's standards, but it was a lot more back then. August Lund, Charles Evans, and Henry Arcaro had their bail set at a lesser amount of $1,000 each since they played a lesser part in the assault and murder. Blackburn's bail was higher at $10,000. He was suspected to be one of the ringleaders in the affair. Henry Osgood's bail was set at $25,000, and his bail was paid by his friends. In today's standards, that would be over $700,000 in bail. That's insane. 4 more days after the weekend, on February 10th, Sheriff Boggs reopened the court. All parties were present and ready to go. W.A. Maxwell testified next. Maxwell was one of the party that came to the retreat after Bennett had ridden to Middletown to sound the alarm. Hudson, the defense lawyer, objected. Grounds for the objection were complicated. Maxwell wished to speak of matters that Risch had told him about W.R. McGuire, found dead on the porch of the campers' retreat. McGuire had been shot by persons unknown during the fight. The lawyer Hudson tried to make an objection, saying that the court reporter had failed at doing his job. The lawyer said that the court reporter failed to certify the transcript of evidence of Guyer's death by murder. Further, the reporter had neglected to fill out in shorthand the evidence testimony supporting Guyer's murder. However, despite all this, the objection was overruled. The remainder of the day was spent hearing B.F. Staley's testimony. Staley swore that he heard Mrs. Risch speak before she died. Whatever Staley said, he was so self-serving that the court did not allow that testimony. John Francis was part of the gang. As part of the people's case against Blackburn, John Francis was called to speak. However, John Francis, he was one of Blackburn's friends, and he did not want to testify against Blackburn. He was not part of the raid because he had been talked out of going by his wife. So Blackburn was trying to rope him in, and the wife is like, that's a bad idea, you are not going. And he listened. Good guy. They asked him, what did Blackburn say to you at that time in regards to the crime at Campers Retreat? John Francis replied, I decline to answer, as my answer might have a tendency to incriminate me. The jury was excluded from the courtroom. The argument was heard by the court by the counsel for the witness and counsel for the people on the matter of refusal of a witness to answer a question. The jury was brought back into the courtroom. John Francis was instructed by the court as to his rights to answer questions. Witness again refused to answer questions, whereupon he was informed by the court that he was in contempt of court in refusing to obey its order, and it was the duty of the court to banish him for such contempt. Henry Arcaro was called next. Like John Francis, because his testimony could possibly convict him of a felony, Arcaro refused to answer questions, and Arcaro was in prison at the county jail. Charles Osgood was called. The prosecution asked, "Did you not say that Blackburn said to you, 'Charlie, I found the thing to make masks. It's flour sacks'?" Charles was just like, nah, I'm not answering that question. Nope. Not going to do it because it'll incriminate me." Same story for each of them, it seems like. Osgood was next asked where he was on the night of the crime. He answered, "I'd been resting." The court instructed the witness to answer more fully. After refusing to elaborate on his answer, the court found Osgood in contempt, and like others, he was jailed. Counsel for the People by C.W. Taylor, McDougall, and the counsels for the witness, Hudson, and the Assistant District Attorney Taylor proposed a 15-minute recess to address the witness. After 15 minutes, the clerk conveyed the courtroom. Sheriff Boggs was present to make sure the witness did not flee, since the witness, Francis and Arcaro, had already been promised imprisonment. John Francis, the witness again, was called to the witness stand. Again, he was asked the same question. What did Blackburn say to you at that time? Everyone was getting tired of being in jail, and they decided that they wanted to work out some sort of deal, immunity, lesser sentence, blah, blah, blah. And John Archer, Scotsman, was the man who broke the case for the prosecution. 6 of the men agreed to spill the tea on their ringleaders: Staley, Osgood, Chadwick, and Blackburn. Thereupon, seeing that they were dead meat, they ended up retreating their pleas of not guilty and pleading guilty of murder in the 2nd degree, so that way they could get a lesser sentence. Francis said, "I attended the first meeting with the other men. Blackburn showed me the names and said that they decided to tar and feather Bennett. Not Reish, but Bennett. While I was there, gunny sacks were cut into coats, and I was shown the cat o' nine tails. Bennett was to get 20 lashes the day after the raid. Blackburn told me Staley killed McGuire. The court told him that because he had answered the question, that his punishment would no longer be enforced." Henry Arcaro was called to the witness stand. W. Taylor, Assistant District Attorney, examined Arcaro. Taylor asked, "What did Stanley say to Blackburn?" Arcaro replied, "We have made a bad job of it. We had better go back and finish it." Arcaro said, "McGuire and Blackburn were the leaders of the conspiracy. Blackburn got the guns for the men who did not have any." Taylor asked him, "What did Blackburn say?" The defendant's attorney objected. He mentioned to strike out the answer as hearsay, and court actually sustained in his objection. Hearsay rules, I swear. The examination of Fred Bennett was continued on part of the prosecution. One undershirt offered in evidence was identified as having been the bloody shirt worn by Helen at the time that she was shot at the campers' retreat. There was an objection by the defendant's counsel to introduce the shirt, but this objection was overruled. Osgood stated, "On October 8th, McGuire came to see me about a plan to raid the campers' retreat. They intended to tar and feather Fred Bennett. At our first meeting, I was asked to have Staley join us. Staley and I were living together in one of the Bullion Mine cabins. The following night, we all took an oath. If anyone spoke of the raid, he must pay with his life. So if anyone spoke about what was going on, they would end up dead. They put burnt cork ashes on their face to darken them, and wore flour sack coats and masks. McGuire, the leader, told us that there must be no bloodshed on the way over to Arish's place. McGuire called Staley and me. He said if Bennett or the Rishes abuse us, of course, we must defend ourselves. When we were all on the porch, McGuire gave a signal from the whistle with an empty .44 shell casing, and we entered the tavern in a body. After the shooting was over, we all went out and we all walked down the road. We repeated our oath to keep silent and returned to Bickard's house by different routes. Evans stated, "I saw McGuire holding Mrs. Reich, and McGuire's gun went off." Bickard gave the court more details of the raid. As we entered, Mrs. Reich ran toward McGuire. He caught her and threw her on the ground. McGuire's pistol went off, and a volley of shots were fired at the woman by those that were present. Bickard's description of a volley fired by those present was also never clarified, and the exact person or persons that filled Mrs. Reese's body with 5 bullets was never made clear. Since McGuire had killed Mrs. Reich, the group decided, oh, well, then we should kill McGuire, because then that kind of cancels each other out, right? Murder plus murder equals free. Come on, guys. Granted, I guess I didn't really know much about law, but come on. The jury deliberated for 6 days and brought in a verdict on Blackburn and Staley of the murder in the 2nd degree. Osgood and Chadwick were tried and received a verdict for the same. The court dismissed the cases against Lund, Martin, Archer, Arcaro, Evans, and Bickard. The reasons given for their dismissal was because they aided the prosecution and because they were drawn into the affair by Blackburn. Basically, since they ratted out the rest of them, they were able to go free. The 4 convicted men were sentenced. Charles Osgood was to serve 20 years, Charles Blackburn was to serve 25 years, Robert Chadwick to serve 20 years, and B.F. Stanley 20 years in San Quentin prison. After the sentencing, a wave of letters and petitions rolled in from friends of the convicts. Blackburn was a leader in the Republican GAR, the Grand Army of Republic, despite the wails of protest and an avalanche of angry letters and speeches. Eventually, all 4 men were released from prison within 3 years of their incarceration. So they all got over 20 years, and they only served 3 years because everyone made such an uproar because, oh my gosh, they're such good guys. They can't be in here. What are you doing? They're such good people. Who cares that, they planned on torturing a guy and that a woman was brutally murdered? We gotta let them go because they're such great people. Murder's murder, people. Especially when it's somebody innocent. They literally were gonna tar and torture a dude. It was the intent. It wasn't an accident. This is the end to today's Lake County history story. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you have any recommendations on what I should do next, make sure to comment below or message me with any ideas. I'm always happy to hear all of your ideas. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more videos. Until next time, have a good one.